Officer shocked when his silent son says daddy to his canine dog. What happened next will make you cry. A grieving father, a silent child, and a rescue dog with a scarred past. Officer Liam Carter thought he was just saving a German shepherd from the shelter, but what he didn't know was that the dog would end up saving his son's voice. It started with a whisper, barely a breath. Buddy. And in that moment, everything changed. What happened next will warm your soul, break your heart, and rebuild it, one word at a time. Before we begin, I have to ask, do you have a dog who's more like family than a pet? Drop their name in the comments. I'd love to hear about your best friend. And if you believe every child deserves a second chance and every animal deserves a home, hit that subscribe button, because this story might just restore your faith in love, healing, and the magic of connection. The wind in Silver Creek, Montana had a particular way of speaking in December. Whispers in the pine trees, sighs against frost-covered porches, and the occasional groan of ice forming beneath snow-laden roofs. On this particular morning, the air was so crisp it felt like it could shatter with a breath. Snow coated everything in a soft blanket of white, and the sky hung low and gray, as though holding back the weight of more snow to come. Officer Liam Carter stepped out of his patrol SUV, boots crunching on the ice-crusted driveway of the Silver Creek Animal Shelter. At 32, Liam bore the lean build of someone who worked with his body and carried the kind of quiet solemnity that came only with grief. He had light brown hair, always a bit tousled from his habit of running his fingers through it when thinking. His eyes, deep blue and often tired, were the kind that looked straight through pretense. A man molded by service, fatherhood, and, most recently, loss. A year ago, he had lost his wife, Claire, in a tragic car accident during an early winter storm not unlike today's. Since then, he had tried to keep life stable for their 2-year-old son, Eli, whose world had shattered that night along with Liam's. Eli had barely spoken since, just 1 or 2 murmurs during dreams, and then nothing. The silence had become a companion in their home, as present as the cold. The door to the shelter creaked open and a bell jingled above his head. The warmth inside smelled faintly of pine cleaner and wet fur. "Liam Carter," came a raspy voice from behind a counter. "Didn't expect to see a uniform this early." He turned and offered a polite nod to Sarah Jennings, the shelter's longtime caretaker. Sarah, in her late 60s, was a tall and wiry woman, her gray hair pulled into a tight braid down her back. Years of managing neglected animals had left her with hands rough as tree bark and a voice like sandpaper over stone. But there was kindness in her face, a worn, enduring kind, tempered by years of heartbreak and healing. "Following up on a lead," Liam said, taking off his gloves. "Someone reported a possible stolen dog sighting matching one from Helena. Turned out to be a shaggy retriever mix with 3 legs and a fondness for hot dogs. Not the dog we're looking for." Sarah chuckled. "They're all looking for something, aren't they?" As Liam walked further in, his eyes fell upon a pen in the far corner of the shelter, a space quieter than the others. Inside sat a large German shepherd, alert but motionless, his fur a classic black and tan with a graying patch along his left flank. He was muscular but lean, built like a retired athlete, still proud but slower now. There was a small scar just above his back leg, like a faint white slash through otherwise sleek fur. Liam paused. The dog was watching him, not barking, not pacing, just watching. "That one," Sarah said softly, walking up beside him. "Shadow." "Shadow?" Liam asked, eyes still locked with the dog's. 4 years old. Former K9. Saved his handler during a building collapse outside Billings. Dragged the guy out after a gas line explosion. Both survived, but the unit was disbanded shortly after. Dog disappeared off the radar. Turns out someone just dumped him here a few months ago. No chip, no records left. Like he vanished and then returned with nobody wanting to claim him. Liam knelt slowly beside the pen, the air heavy with that strange stillness again. Shadow tilted his head just slightly. "He doesn't bark much," Sarah continued. Doesn't whine, doesn't eat unless someone's near, but when he looks at you like that—" She trailed off, the roughness in her voice softening. "It's like he knows something about you don't even want to say out loud." Liam reached through the bars slowly, offering his hand, palm up. Shadow didn't flinch. Instead, the dog stood, walked over with fluid, silent steps, and pressed his nose into Liam's palm. A single exhale escaped from Liam's chest, something between a sigh and a surrender. "I have a son," he murmured. "He doesn't talk, not since his mother." Sarah said nothing, but her eyes softened. "I'm not sure if this helps anyone," Liam added, "but maybe this dog needs a home just like we do." Sarah blinked slowly. "He's yours, if you want him. He's got nowhere else to go." That night, the air in Silver Creek grew colder, but inside Liam's home, a modest two-story house on Pine Hollow Lane, there was a new sound: the gentle patting of paws against hardwood and the soft breathing of a dog curled at the foot of a child's bed. Eli had watched Shadow come in with a kind of quiet curiosity. The boy was small for his age, with a mop of chestnut curls and solemn green eyes that seemed too old for his toddler frame. He hadn't spoken when Liam introduced the dog, hadn't reacted when Shadow walked near. But as Liam tucked him into bed and turned off the light, Shadow lay down at the edge of the room without a command. And as the wind howled outside, Eli turned his head, just slightly, toward where Shadow lay. It wasn't much, but it was a start. The sun struggled to rise over Silver Creek the next morning, casting only a faint silver gleam over the frosted rooftops and the snow-laced branches of pine trees. The world outside Liam Carter's modest home remained still, cloaked in the kind of cold that made the air sting your lungs with each breath. Inside, however, the warmth of life was beginning to stir again, even if quietly. Eli Carter, 2 years old with a mop of chestnut curls and pale green eyes, sat cross-legged by the wide living room window. His tiny hands clutched his worn teddy bear, one ear nearly torn off, the fabric matted and stained from years of hugs and grief. The boy's face was blank, as if frozen in some memory no one else could see. He made no sound, only watched the snowflakes swirl beyond the glass. Shadow lay just behind him, a quiet sentinel with black and tan fur gently rising and falling with his breath. The German shepherd rested his head on his front paws, but kept his amber eyes fixed on the boy, as if trying to decode the silence with patience alone. Liam watched from the kitchen archway, coffee in hand. He had hoped that bringing Shadow into the house would spark something in Eli, but the boy hadn't said a word, hadn't even reached out to touch the dog. And yet, there was a strange calm in the way they occupied the same space. Liam didn't know what to call it, but it was different from before. That evening, after tucking Eli into bed, Liam sat in the hallway with Shadow beside him. He reached into an old wooden drawer of a side cabinet and pulled out a slim voice recorder, weathered, scratched along the edges, but still intact. He hadn't touched it in nearly a year. It was one of the last things Claire had used. Claire Anderson. Carter had been a gentlewoman with auburn hair and a laugh that sounded like bells in spring. She had once been a school music teacher, and lullabies were her secret language with Eli. Liam had recorded one of her bedtime songs without her knowing. One quiet autumn night, the last October they'd all had together. He clicked play. The device crackled slightly, then a soft, lilting voice filled the hallway. "Sleep now, little star. The night will keep you warm." Liam closed his eyes for a moment, the pain still raw even after all this time. Shadow's ears perked immediately. The German shepherd lifted his head and turned toward the sound. Slowly, he tilted it, left, then right, his amber eyes fixed on the recorder as if drawn to something deeper within the melody. Liam's brows furrowed. Shadow continued listening, his entire body alert, but still. "You remember music?" Liam asked quietly, half to himself. The dog didn't move, but when the lullaby ended, he let out a faint breath through his nose, almost like a sigh. Liam replayed it. Again, the same response, attentive, respectful, still. It wasn't a coincidence. The dog was listening. From Eli's room came the rustle of bed sheets. Liam stood and quietly pushed the door open. Eli was still curled under his blankets, Teddy held to his chest, but his eyes were open, and they were moist. He wasn't crying exactly, just watching the ceiling, silent tears glistening without sound. Liam walked in and sat gently beside the bed, Shadow following behind and lying down at the foot without instruction. "Do you remember this song, buddy?" Liam asked softly. Eli didn't answer, but his small fingers began to tap rhythmically against the teddy bear's arm, slowly, in time with the song's rhythm. It was subtle, almost imperceptible, but it was the first reaction Liam had seen in weeks. For the next 3 nights, Liam played the recording once before bedtime, and each time Shadow would react the same, ears perked, head tilted, eyes closed by the end as if meditating. Eli's tapping fingers became a nightly ritual. Still no words, no sounds, but a rhythm, a response. On the 4th night, Liam didn't play the song. He wanted to see if it mattered. Eli didn't sleep. He sat up in bed, restless, looking toward the hallway. Shadow, sensing something, padded over and nuzzled the boy's arm gently. For the first time, Eli reached out and touched Shadow's ear, brief, like lightning, then pulled back, but Shadow didn't move. He leaned closer. Eli, after a long pause, touched the dog's face again and left his hand there, just resting against the fur. No words, just warmth. Downstairs, Liam stood in the hallway and swallowed hard. He didn't dare interrupt. The wall of silence around Eli hadn't fallen, but maybe, just maybe, it had cracked. The morning broke clear and unusually bright for Silver Creek in December. A powdery layer of new snow had fallen overnight, coating the small town in a fragile shimmer. Sunlight bounced off rooftops and icy branches, painting the world in pale blue and silver. The air was sharp, the kind that nipped at exposed skin but carried a freshness that hinted, faintly, at hope. Inside the Carter house on Pine Hollow Lane, quiet reigned as usual, but it was no longer suffocating. It had shifted, taken on a softer tone. As Liam stirred his coffee in the kitchen, the gentle sound of paws across the hardwood floor followed by the soft patter of toddler feet signaled the new morning routine. Shadow moved silently through the hall, always a few paces behind Eli. The dog's alert, amber eyes never left the child's form, but he made no demands. He simply followed, watched, waited. Eli, now more curious than withdrawn, had begun exploring small parts of the house again. He hadn't spoken, not even a whisper, but the way he moved, tentative but deliberate, suggested that something inside him had shifted. Where before he stared through things, now his gaze lingered. Observed. It was still early when it happened. Liam was rinsing a bowl in the kitchen sink when he heard the bark, sharp, sudden, and startling. Not a loud alarm bark, but a single, forceful woof that echoed through the house. Liam froze, heart pounding. Shadow rarely barked, and when he did, it meant something. He dropped the bowl into the sink and hurried through the living room, the sound of Shadow's claws scraping the floor drawing him to the front door. And there, just beyond the glass storm door, stood Eli, barefoot. The boy had wandered outside in his pajamas, his tiny feet pressing into the crust of fresh snow. His hands were held loosely at his sides, and he was gazing at the tall pine tree just beyond the porch. Liam's breath caught. "Eli!" But before he could rush forward, he saw it. Eli turned around. His small face tilted back slightly, and he looked directly at Shadow, who was standing stiff and alert inside, barking once again. Their eyes locked. Liam stopped mid-step. It wasn't just a glance. Eli had looked at him. Shadow barked once more, this time softer, and Eli responded, not with words, not yet, but with something just as powerful. He took a step back toward the door, turned again, and reached out a hand toward the glass. Shadow pressed his nose to the other side. Liam knelt down as he opened the door, quickly lifting the child into his arms. "You scared me," he whispered, hugging Eli tightly. "You can't go outside without shoes, buddy." Eli didn't respond, but as Liam held him, he turned his head toward Shadow and stared again, this time for longer. It was silent, but not empty. Something had passed between them, some unspoken moment of recognition. Back inside, Liam sat Eli on the couch and wrapped his small feet in a warm towel. He glanced at Shadow, who had returned to his usual place on the rug nearby, his body relaxed now, but his eyes still watching. Later that afternoon, when Eli napped peacefully upstairs, Liam sat at the small wooden desk in his study. It was tucked in the corner of a sunlit room filled with old books, framed photographs, and a worn leather chair that Claire used to love reading in. Liam opened a fresh notebook. The cover was plain brown leather, the pages crisp and empty. He wrote the date, then paused. After a long moment, he titled the page, Eli and the Silent Friend. He stared at the words for a moment, then smiled faintly to himself before writing, Today, Shadow barked twice. The second time wasn't just a warning, it was a message. Eli stepped into the snow without shoes. Shadow knew something wasn't right, and when Eli looked back, he didn't just look, he saw him. For the first time, I think Eli saw someone other than me. Maybe Shadow doesn't speak, but he's saying more than we ever expected. Liam paused. He glanced at the window where sunlight now filtered through frost-laced glass. Shadow lay beside the desk, tail slowly thumping against the floor as if in quiet agreement. Claire used to keep journals. She believed in writing things down, believed that moments deserved a place to rest, even if they were small. Liam hadn't written anything in months, but now it felt right. In the following days, he would continue the journal, but that afternoon he simply closed it, leaned back, and allowed himself to believe that the wall was beginning to crack. The snow in Silver Creek had thickened overnight, settling in deep folds across yards and fences like a heavy white quilt. It was the kind of morning where breath turned instantly to mist, and the world moved slower, muffled under layers of ice and silence. The Carter home stood quietly at the edge of Pine Hollow Lane, smoke curling from the chimney, a warm contrast to the frozen world outside. Liam zipped up Eli's coat and slipped mittens onto the boy's hands. It had taken days of gentle prompting, but Eli now accepted these little routines without resistance. The boy's green eyes, so guarded only weeks ago, now blinked with the soft curiosity of a child just beginning to remember how to trust the world. "Boots," Liam said, handing them over. Eli sat on the bench by the door, legs dangling, and pulled the boots on clumsily. Shadow stood beside him, patient and still, as always. The 4-year-old German Shepherd had become Eli's quiet shadow. His name never felt more fitting than it did now. Today, the dog wore a simple harness, nothing more than a strap across his broad chest and a loop Liam could hold when needed. His breath fogged gently in the hallway air, and a dusting of snow from his earlier outing clung to his back legs. They walked slowly through the neighborhood trail behind their home, a wide path between tall pines dusted with frost. The trail wasn't well plowed, but Liam preferred it that way. He liked the quiet, and it was easier for Eli here, away from honking cars or strangers who didn't know not to ask questions. The boy trudged forward through the snow with a Shadow close beside him, their footsteps leaving small parallel lines in the soft powder. Liam trailed behind, hands in his coat pockets, smiling faintly at the sight. He hadn't planned on going far, just to the old bench near the frozen creek bend. But halfway down the trail, it happened. Shadow, who had been walking steadily, suddenly let out a short, choked yelp and stumbled. His back leg buckled and he collapsed onto his side in the snow. The movement was so sudden, so wrong, that Liam instantly surged forward. "Shadow!" But Eli was faster. The little boy ran to the dog, falling to his knees in the snow. His face twisted in something between panic and confusion. He reached out both hands to Shadow's leg, touching it tentatively. Liam was almost there when he heard it, something so small and soft he questioned if it had been real. A voice. "Sha, Sha," Eli murmured, his breath trembling. Liam froze. Eli looked down at Shadow's leg, then back at Liam. His lips moved again. "Sha-do." Liam dropped beside them, heart racing. "Eli!" The boy didn't look at him. He leaned forward, still kneeling in the snow, and rested his hand on Shadow's back. His other hand gently touched the dog's flank, just above the scar Liam had noticed weeks before. Shadow didn't whine. He looked back at the boy with a flicker of recognition in his eyes, like he knew what this moment meant. The snow continued to fall softly around them, dusting Eli's hood and eyelashes. Liam crouched close, watching in stunned silence. Eli whispered again, "Hurts." It wasn't loud, it wasn't clear, but it was a word, and it broke something open inside Liam he hadn't even realized he'd been holding together. Shadow whimpered softly as Liam checked his leg. It wasn't broken, just a spasm. Likely a cramp or strain from the cold and the old injury Sarah had mentioned. Liam gently massaged the muscle, murmuring reassurances as Shadow relaxed into the snow. Behind them, a soft rustle of boots over packed snow interrupted the silence. "Liam?" He turned to see Darlene Meyer, their next-door neighbor, bundled in a thick coat and knitted blue hat, her face flushed from the cold. Darlene was in her early 70s, small-framed and quick with a warm smile or a firm opinion depending on the topic. Widowed for over a decade, she spent most of her days tending her garden or baking for the church charity drives. Her eyes, a faded hazel, widened as she took in the scene. "I was coming to drop off some fresh cinnamon rolls," she said, holding up a small Tupperware box wrapped in a red scarf. "But I saw him. Eli. He spoke." Liam nodded, not trusting his voice just yet. Darlene stood still for a moment, as if committing the sight to memory. Then, gently, "Claire would be so proud." Liam's throat tightened. He looked down at Eli, who was now petting Shadow's side slowly, almost rhythmically. The boy's lips were closed again, but the moment had happened. There was no taking it back. That evening, word spread faster than Liam expected. By the time the sun had fully set and the fireplace glowed warm in their living room, Liam's phone buzzed with messages. Darlene, true to form, had told the story in full at the grocery store and to the ladies' quilting group. He didn't mind. In a town like Silver Creek, stories didn't spread unless they were needed. And this one, it was needed. He returned to his desk that night and opened the journal. December 18th. Eli and the Silent Friend. Today, I heard my son's voice again. Not in a dream, not in a memory, but in real time, in the snow, with a hand on a dog's scar. He said a name, he said a word. He said, "Hurts." And for the first time in over a year, I think something inside him is waking up. Shadow slept by the fireplace, a blanket thrown loosely over his side. Eli sat beside him on the floor, one hand on his fur, humming a tune under his breath. Not words, not yet, but something close. The snow outside the Carter home had begun to melt in patches, forming thin crusts of ice over the sidewalks and curling in dripping ribbons from the eaves. February was creeping into Silver Creek like a hesitant promise, still cold, still gray, but with a flicker of sunlight that hinted at change. Inside the house on Pine Hollow Lane, warmth crackled softly from the fireplace, casting golden shadows over the floor where Eli and Shadow lay side by side. Eli was humming again. Not a song, not quite, just a string of soft exhalations, murmurs, whispers, gentle imitations of breath and sound that had no words but carried meaning. And always, always, Shadow listened. The German shepherd's black and tan ears would twitch with each rise and fall of Eli's voice. He would lift his head, tilt it slightly, and answer in his own way, a quiet woof, a low huff, a soft wag of his tail. Liam stood in the hallway, one hand against the doorframe, holding his breath like he might scare the moment away. The boy, still small in his footed pajamas, reached out a hand to touch the dog's nose. He whispered, Bud. It wasn't a sentence, it wasn't even a word, but it was a pattern. That night, after Eli was asleep and Shadow had settled at the foot of the boy's bed, Liam sat down at the kitchen table with an Amazon package he'd picked up that morning. Inside was a small motion-activated camera, discreet, easy to place, and linked to an app on his phone. He didn't want to spy. He just wanted to remember. He mounted it in the corner of the living room, angled toward Eli's play area. A faded blue rug, a few wooden animal toys, and a second-hand bookshelf filled with picture books and soft plush animals, most of them untouched. But lately, that room had become the heart of their home. 2 nights later, the camera recorded something unexpected. It was just after 8. The fire had burned low, and Liam was doing the dishes, the soft clatter of ceramic barely audible. Eli sat on the rug, one leg folded under him, the other tapping gently. He had lined up a few plastic animal figures, an elephant, a fox, a bear, and was whispering to them, mostly unintelligible. Shadow lay across from him, paws stretched forward, ears alert. And then it happened. Eli leaned forward, pressing his hand flat against Shadow's chest, and said clearly, "Buddy." Liam hadn't been in the room, but when he checked the footage later that night, sitting alone in the quiet dark with only the hum of the fridge beside him, he watched it again and again. The word was real. The sound was clear. And what came next, Shadow rising slowly to his feet, approaching the boy and licking his cheek, was undeniable. Eli laughed. It was the softest laugh Liam had ever heard, a light, breathy giggle, a sound he hadn't heard in over a year, and Liam cried. Not from sadness, not entirely from joy, either. It was the kind of crying that comes from release, from the lifting of a burden you hadn't realized was crushing you until it was gone. He uploaded the clip to a private folder first. Then, the next morning, after hesitating for half an hour, he posted a short version, just 15 seconds, to a local community board online. "After a year of silence," he wrote, "my son spoke his first word. Not to me, not even to himself, but to our rescue dog, Shadow. He called him Buddy." He didn't expect what happened next. Within hours, the video was shared dozens of times. By the end of the week, it had reached over 1,000 views. The local paper called. A teacher from the elementary school reached out and offered to drop off some interactive storybooks. And an old classmate of Claire's, now a speech therapist, messaged to say she was available for a consult if they ever wanted it. But most of all, what poured in were comments. From other parents, grandparents, strangers, veterans, people who had children that didn't speak, children who had found comfort in animals, or people who simply needed to see something good in the world for once. Liam kept most of this from Eli. He didn't want the boy to feel watched or pressured, but that weekend he did print out one of the comments and taped it to the refrigerator. "Thank you for sharing this moment. I haven't smiled like this in weeks. Give Buddy a treat from me." Eli never noticed the paper, but Shadow did. He sniffed at it one morning and wagged his tail. In the journal that night, Liam wrote, February 2nd, Eli and the Silent Friend. He said, "Buddy." It wasn't forced. It wasn't coaxed. It just happened. A word caught in the wind between two friends, and the laughter that followed was like waking up from a year-long winter. I don't think I'll ever forget that sound. Outside, the wind picked up again, brushing against the windows like a gentle knock. Inside, a boy and his dog dreamed side by side. The night fell thick and heavy over Silver Creek, the moon hanging pale behind streaks of low winter clouds. A thin sleet had begun to drift through the air, sharp and stinging, coating everything in a thin layer of icy sheen. The streets glistened under the flicker of old street lamps, and the trees stood still like quiet sentinels wrapped in frost. Liam Carter pulled his jacket tighter as he stepped out of the precinct, the familiar crunch of salt beneath his boots echoing across the parking lot. He worked the late shift that night, paperwork and route planning, nothing dangerous, but it was long past midnight now, and the cold made everything feel slower, heavier. He drove his county-issued SUV down Pine Hollow Lane, tires humming against the slick asphalt. Just as he turned onto the bend near the wooded trail that skirted the neighborhood, a deer darted out from the tree line. He swerved, instinctive, sudden, and the SUV spun violently on the black ice. A loud crunch tore through the air as the vehicle slid off the road, tumbling down a small embankment before crashing sideways against a half-frozen shrub. Then silence. At home, Shadow stirred. The German shepherd had been asleep beside Eli's bed, his head resting near the child's small legs. But something changed in the air, a shift, a tension. The dog's ears twitched. Then he stood, sniffed the door, and growled low in his throat. Eli woke, eyes wide in the dark, sensing something even if he couldn't explain it. Shadow trotted to the front door and let out a sharp bark, then another, louder, insistent. Eli climbed off the bed, his little fingers fumbling at the coat rack for his red puffer jacket, the one with the faded rocket ship patch. He didn't bother with shoes. Shadow barked again, then scratched at the door. Eli looked toward the hallway, empty. Liam wasn't home yet, and Shadow wouldn't stop barking. Finally, the child opened the front door. The wind hit him like a slap, cold and biting, but Shadow didn't hesitate. The dog took off down the porch steps and toward the road. Eli, eyes wide with something between fear and certainty, followed barefoot into the night. 3 houses down, Darlene Meyer was dozing in her recliner with a heating pad pressed against her lower back. The TV was on low, reruns of a cooking show, but it was the barking that woke her. That dog, that shepherd, it was him, Shadow. She hurried to the window and saw him, darting past her front walk, then back again, like he was hurting something. Then she spotted the tiny figure in red. "Dear God," she whispered, rushing to the door. By the time she stepped outside, Eli was shivering in the yard, looking around wildly. His cheeks were pink from cold, and his breath came fast in the air. Shadow barked again and then ran a few feet before stopping, looking back at them. "What is it, sweetheart?" Darlene said, wrapping her arms around Eli. Eli's lips trembled. His eyes filled with tears. Not from the cold, but from something deeper. And then, with a strength that surprised them both, he shouted, "Daddy!" The word sliced through the night like lightning. Raw, unmistakable. Darlene's eyes widened. She hadn't heard that word from him, not ever. Shadow barked again and darted toward the bend in the road. "Inside, baby," Darlene said quickly, scooping Eli into her arms and yelling into her house. "Rick, grab the truck. We've got to follow that dog." Rick Meyer, her son, a burly man in his 40s with calloused hands and a kind, sleepy face, was already pulling on his boots. A contractor by trade, Rick didn't say much, but he moved fast when Darlene barked orders. Within 3 minutes, they were in his old Chevy, headlights slicing through the cold night, following Shadow's streaking figure across the sleet-covered road. They found the wreck at the bottom of the ditch near the trail. Liam's SUV was tilted sideways, driver's side against the frozen brush. The windshield was cracked, and the front grille had crumpled like tin. Shadow was standing beside the car, barking again, tail rigid. Rick climbed down carefully while Darlene kept Eli close. "Here, I see him. He's alive," Rick shouted. "Unconscious but breathing." Liam was pulled out carefully, his leg twisted awkwardly but no blood. Thankfully, no head trauma. He groaned as the cold air hit his face and stirred faintly as they lifted him into the truck. The town's acting sheriff, Greg Holloway, arrived not long after, having been called in by Darlene. Greg was a lean man in his 50s with steel-gray hair, deep frown lines, and a practical manner that often came across as curt, but was grounded in deep care for his people. A widower himself, Greg had been a mentor to Liam during his first years in uniform. He scribbled notes as he reviewed the scene, then looked at Shadow, who now sat quietly beside the recovered vehicle, tail slowly thumping. "Well, I'll be," Greg muttered. "That dog found him." Darlene nodded. "And got Eli to wake me. Liam would have frozen down there." Greg scratched behind his ear, then bent down and patted Shadow once on the head. "You're something else, you know that?" He reached into his jacket and tore a page from his field notepad. Under Remarks, he wrote, "Rescue credited to German Shepherd Shadow. Status, unofficial but effective. Recommend honorary status." He tore the page free and handed it to Darlene. "Give this to Liam when he wakes. Tell him we've got a new officer on the team. No badge needed." Back home, hours later, Liam stirred in bed, groggy but conscious. His leg was sprained, but he'd be fine. And when Eli clambered onto the bed, tiny fingers pressed into Liam's chest, the man blinked at him and whispered, "Hey, buddy." Eli's face crumpled, and then, voice shaky, raw, he whispered back, "Daddy." Liam closed his eyes, pulling his son close, heart full in a way he hadn't felt in a year. Shadow lay at the foot of the bed, eyes half-lidded, tail flicking once against the quilt. Mission complete. The thaw had begun in Silver Creek. The snowdrifts that once lined the edges of Pine Hollow Lane now slouched in uneven mounds, melting into rivulets that traced lines along the curbs. The sun came earlier now, sometimes peeking through the gray mornings with hesitant gold. Spring was on its way. Not fully here, but whispering its arrival in puddles and chirping sparrows. Inside the Carter home, the seasons had already shifted. Eli's voice had become a quiet song that wove through the rooms. Not full sentences, not yet, but words, real ones. One by one they came, sometimes prompted, sometimes unexpected. The first and most frequent remained "buddy," always directed at Shadow, always with the soft affection of a child greeting a lifelong friend. "Buddy," Eli said each morning, tiny hands wrapped around the German shepherd's thick neck as he buried his face in the fur. "Juice," he'd request next, pointing at the fridge, then giggling when Liam exaggeratedly fumbled through the drawers to find his favorite orange sippy cup. "Book," he'd announce after nap time, pulling one of Claire's old storybooks from the low shelf. "Doggy," he'd whisper as he patted Shadow's back during a slow walk to the mailbox. And each night, after stories and lullabies and the long, warm bath that left his hair curling damp at his temples, Eli would nestle into bed, pull Shadow close like a pillow, and murmur against the dog's side, "Good boy." Sometimes Liam would stand in the doorway just to listen, to watch, to remember that there had been a time, just months ago, when the house had felt like a shell of itself. Now it breathed again. It was during one of these nights, as Liam sipped tea and reread an old journal entry, that he found the application. He'd bookmarked it weeks ago, the Montana Child Companion Program, a statewide initiative that certified former service dogs as emotional support companions for children. The program offered community recognition, training support, and access to visits at schools, libraries, and hospitals. Shadow had already proven himself, more than once. But something about making it official felt right. The process required a behavioral evaluation and vet certification. The next day, Liam called Dr. Jennifer Rayburn, a local veterinarian with a calming presence and a kind, bookish face framed by dark, thick-rimmed glasses. She'd treated animals in Silver Creek for nearly 15 years and had a quiet way of speaking that made both pets and their owners feel at ease. Dr. Rayburn met them at her small clinic just off Alder Road. It was a warm building with old wooden floors and a bell that jingled cheerfully when the door opened. Posters of smiling dogs and facts about pet dental health covered the walls. "Well, if it isn't our local hero," she said as Shadow walked in beside Eli, tail swaying. Liam chuckled. "They walk everywhere together now, like they've fused at the hip." Dr. Rayburn knelt down, her eyes soft. "Hello, Shadow. Let's take a look at you." The checkup went smoothly. Shadow tolerated everything. The thermometer, the paw pads inspection, even the gentle probing around the scar tissue on his hind leg. Eli watched from a small chair in the corner, swinging his feet and whispering, "Good boy, good boy." Dr. Rayburn looked over her notes, then smiled. "He's in remarkable shape. For a dog with his history, he's steady, responsive, and his bond with Eli is exceptional. I'll approve the form." Later that week, Shadow passed the behavior observation with a volunteer from the program, Marta Kinley, a retired school counselor in her 60s with salt and pepper hair and a well-worn denim jacket with a stitched sunflower patch. Marta had a soft spot for animals, especially those with a past. She met Shadow in Liam's front yard, armed with a clipboard and a pocket full of treats. "He doesn't flinch," Marta noted. "No signs of aggression, and his attention span is impressive. Most dogs lose interest after 10 minutes. He's still watching Eli." By Friday, the final paperwork was in. Shadow was now officially recognized as a healing companion dog, registered with the Montana Child Companion Program. The following Monday, Liam received a call from the town library. Miss Luann Crick, a petite, energetic woman with curly gray hair and a voice like wind chimes, had seen the video of Eli calling Shadow Buddy. She invited them to participate in the library's new Read to a Dog program for shy readers. "It's just a half hour, once a week," she explained. "Children sit and read to Shadow. No pressure, just a calm listener." Liam looked at Eli, who was lying on the rug with a book in hand, reading Hop on Pop in soft syllables to Shadow. The dog lay still, eyes half-lidded, tail thumping occasionally. "I think he'd love that," Liam said. That night, as the house settled and the wind rustled faintly outside, Liam tucked Eli into bed. The boy's hair was still damp, cheeks flushed from the bath. Shadow curled against him, the perfect weight, the perfect warmth. "Good boy," Eli whispered again, fingers entwined in Shadow's fur. "Good boy, Buddy." Liam watched the two of them, his heart full, and opened the journal on the nightstand. March 3rd. Eli and the Silent Friend. The words keep coming, not all at once and not always clearly, but they're there, like spring thaw breaking through the snow, soft at first, but steady. And the miracle, it starts with a name. He says Buddy, like it's a promise. And in a way it is. A promise that healing doesn't come loudly. Sometimes it comes in fur and silence, and one little word at a time. Snow had returned to Silver Creek just in time for Christmas. It arrived not with blizzards or storms, but as a soft, steady fall, flakes like feathers swirling in the hush of early morning. The rooftops gleamed beneath a sky the color of powdered sugar, and the streets lay quiet, as if the whole town had paused to listen to the season settle in. In the Carter home on Pine Hollow Lane, warmth filled every corner. Cinnamon and pine scented the air, a fire crackled gently in the hearth, and laughter, real, rich, and unbroken, echoed from the living room. Liam stood near the fireplace holding a worn wooden box marked Christmas, Claire's Touch. Inside were carefully wrapped ornaments, some faded from time, others still vibrant, each tied to a memory. He lifted one shaped like a star with a painted handprint at its center, Eli's from his first Christmas, and ran his thumb along the edges. Across the room, Eli danced in circles with a red and green garland trailing from his shoulders. He wore fleece pajamas patterned with tiny snowmen, his cheeks flushed from excitement and the warmth of the fire. He paused only to tug at Shadow's tail playfully, gentle and teasing. The dog tolerated it with the same patience he offered every other part of Eli's life, then let out a single soft woof as if to say, "Enough now, partner." "Tree!" Eli shouted, pointing at the corner of the room where a tall, full evergreen stood waiting. It had been donated by a local tree farm, one of many kind gestures from the people of Silver Creek that had become more frequent over the past months. "We're on it, Buddy," Liam said with a smile, setting the ornament down gently and kneeling beside the boy. Together, they began decorating. Liam lifted Eli to reach the higher branches, the boy clinging to his shoulders as he carefully placed a tiny bell above a glittering snowflake. Shadow sat at the base, eyes following each movement as if guarding the ritual. As they worked, there was a knock on the door. Liam answered to find Mayor Helen Brighton, a sturdy woman in her 50s with short-cropped silver hair and a thick wool coat that looked like it had seen many winters. She had a commanding presence, softened only by the ever-present warmth in her eyes and the way she always addressed everyone by name. "Merry Christmas, Liam," she said, handing over a small plaque wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine. "What's this?" "From the town council. We voted last week." She tilted her head toward the driveway, where the front of the Silver Creek Police Department now bore a brand-new wooden sign, mounted just below the American flag. It read, in simple white paint, "Welcome, Shadow, our silent hero." Liam blinked. Mayor Brighton grinned. "We figured it was about time we gave credit where it was due. That dog of yours has done more for this town than some people ever will." Shadow padded up behind Liam and gave a small huff, as if acknowledging the moment without fanfare. "I don't know what to say," Liam murmured, touched. "Say thank you, then come see us at the town square later. There's cocoa and sleigh rides." "I'll think about it." After she left, Liam unwrapped the plaque. Inside it read, "To Shadow, for loyalty without words, bravery without hesitation, and love without condition." That evening, the tree was finally finished. A golden angel, slightly crooked, perched at the top. Eli stood back, hands on hips like a miniature foreman, then turned to Liam and Shadow. "Pretty," he said, then walked forward and hugged Shadow tightly. "My buddy," he whispered, "my bestest buddy." Liam's heart clenched, and before he could respond, Eli turned and looked up at him. "I love you, Daddy." The words came out clear and sure. No hesitation, no prompting. Just the unfiltered love of a child whose world had come back together, piece by precious piece. Liam knelt, wrapping his arms around his son. "I love you too, Eli. So much." Shadow leaned in, pressing his head gently against them both. Later that night, after stories and cocoa and a small gift exchange that included a new squeaky toy for Shadow and a hand-drawn card for Liam, the three of them lay together beneath a blanket on the couch. The fire burned low, and the lights from the tree glowed softly in the corner. Liam opened his journal and wrote by the flicker of firelight. December 24th. Eli and the Silent Friend. It's our first Christmas without Claire, but somehow it doesn't feel like something is missing. It feels like something is beginning. Eli said, "I love you tonight." And to Shadow, he said, "My buddy." That's all it takes sometimes. A dog, a child, a word, and suddenly the house is full again. Snow continued to fall outside, painting Silver Creek in quiet wonder. But inside the little house on Pine Hollow Lane, there was light, laughter, and the sound of a boy whispering to his dog, already dreaming of tomorrow. Sometimes, miracles don't come in thunder or lightning. They come quietly, on four legs, with gentle eyes, and a heart full of silent loyalty. This story wasn't just about a boy learning to speak again. It was about love choosing to stay, about healing that doesn't shout, but whispers. And maybe, just maybe, God sends his angels in fur coats and wagging tails. Shadow didn't just change Eli's life, he reminded us all that faith, love, and second chances still have a place in this world. So, if you're struggling, if you've lost something, or if your heart has gone quiet like Eli's once did, know this: you are not alone, and healing can come in unexpected ways. If this story touched your heart, leave a comment and share it with someone who might need hope today. Comment Amen. If you believe in second chances, in the power of unconditional love, and in the quiet miracles God sends our way. Subscribe to the channel if you believe every life, human or animal, deserves a little more compassion, a little more warmth, and a little more grace. And may God bless you and your family, wherever you are, and keep your heart open for the miracle that might already be walking toward your door.